All right, it's about that time when we have a conversation on the finance bill protest that we've been seeing across the country from last week all the way to today. And joining me for this conversation is Very Reverend Father Evangelos Thiani, who will be representing the National Council of Churches of Kenya. Equally, we'll be joined by Otieno Namwaya, who's a researcher at the Human Rights Watch, and he'll be joining us via way of Zoom. And thank you so much, Father, for making time for us here. Maybe we can start with you. From everything that we've witnessed from last week all the way to today, what has your observation been of the protest?
Thank you very much for having me. I think in general, the fact is it's quite a sad awakening. The fact that we lost so many lives, the fact that so many people are hurt and harmed, the fact that we of the older generation maybe didn't do as much as we should have done, to the fact that, to the extent that our younger generation had to go out into the streets to do something about it. It's quite a sad awakening, and I think this should be one of those last times that we see what happening again in the country.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think knowing that 79% of our country is youthful, then we must be cognizant of the fact that what we were doing previously in handling matters socio-economic or even political ones must change, if not even religious ones. And therefore, this is quite something that woke me up to remember that we must look at the progress the country has made and how far also we have gone back in forgetting so many things that are very essential. Yes.
Okay, we'll get to all the nitty-gritties, but let's bring in Otieno Namwaya. Good evening, and I hope you can hear me, Otieno. Maybe from your point of view, and especially coming from the Human Rights Watch, what has your observation of the protests been? Otieno, if you can hear me, kindly unmute.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you so much. We had several observations. One was that the protests were largely peaceful. We did observe the protest last week on Thursday, and they were largely peaceful up to the end. And then on Tuesday, they were also peaceful at the beginning. But there were two things we noted. One, there were counter-protests. And those were people who claimed to be supporting the finance bill. I think that happened in Eldoret, and then it happened also in Nairobi on Monday, and very early on Tuesday. That sort of caused a bit of conflict and unease. And then the second thing was the behavior of the police. So the first behavior of the police that we thought was concerning was throwing tear gas at unarmed protesters who are not necessarily causing any violence. The second was use of live bullets, sometimes unnecessarily. And where they were using live bullets, they were shooting directly into the crowds. That normally is not allowed in any policing any policing work, and we thought that was very concerning. The third is, of course, the initial characterization by the president of the protesters as organized criminals, and therefore delegitimized the grievances that the protesters were having, and by basically declaring them as criminals who are paid criminal gangs. That was concerning to us, because then it begins to undermine the right to protest.
Thank you so much. Coming back to you further, of course, a lot has been mentioned, a lot has been said, and the question that is in many Kenyans' minds is, why did we have to get to this point?
I think the issue is listening. I would put this as the one thing that cost us everything that we've lost this entire week, because people went with their memorandum of understandings to the Committee of Finance, We went as a church at the beginning of this month of June. We took our own MOU, and we rejected a lot of the aspects of this entire bill, to an extent that we were saying, take it back to the people, speak to them again. We said that then. Many organizations, many people, many professionals said that, many Kenyans from various walks of life said this, but our members of parliament did not listen. The leadership of government did not listen. They had their agenda and they were pushing it forth, but they did not listen. They forgot that their work is to represent people. And the voices of these people that they represent are very important. And for that matter, they were supposed to listen to them, but they didn't. It is this very late hour that they ended up listening. We have pushed this agenda of them listening to us for quite a while, including the entire day, the day that on Tuesday, on Wednesday, we were in State House even, and we were pushing this agenda, listen to the people. And we thank God that finally the president did. Finally, the members of parliament now will end up listening to the people.
Yeah.
And that this will be done in a better way. And we hope that listening to the people will always be the central agenda of our politicians.
Okay.
Because they represent us. If they don't listen to us, then who will? And they will always do what we don't want. And people will go back to the streets. And if they listen, definitely this would not have happened. We pray to God this is the very last time this happens.
You've mentioned that you were in State House. Maybe you can tell us, or the highlights, you know, what exactly the conversation was all about and what exactly was discussed.
The idea was we went to see the president because we wanted him to listen to us on behalf of Kenyans, because as you know, our country is highly religious, and the religious leaders of this nation have always been there on issues when injustice is spoken about, when justice is needed. And we went to see the president because he's our father, he's the leader of this nation. And when we met him, he welcomed us with open hands. He listened to us, each and every issue we raised, and they responded positively. The fact that he said that the bill should go back to Parliament and to be the entire thing is eliminated, and we go back to the drawing board, even though he had his agendas lined up for the nation, we were really happy that he listened to us. This was the entire goal that we were there. And two, to speak to him about initiating a multi-sectoral forum or agenda that will bring all stakeholders on board, including the Gen Zs and anybody else who will be interested and who have either raised their voice or have not yet raised their voice, to come forth and to bring their agenda on the table so that then we can review what is ailing this country, where do we think our country should go, what are our ideas of how to make it better. And for that matter, when the president accepted this, we said as NCCK that we will spearhead this from the grassroots and to the peak of the nation, not just here in Nairobi, but to every county that we have in this country. And we hope that this will be enacted. And we are not waiting for the government. We are doing it already. We are going to bring all stakeholders on board so that we can have a multi-sectoral agenda and talk. And everybody's views will be welcome on that table. Okay. And this is what we agreed with the president to do.
Okay, but you know, before I even get to Otieno, when you say a multi-sectoral approach, this young generation has come out saying, we do not have leaders. So who are you talking to?
Leaders are always born and formed every day. And the reality is you cannot say that you do not have leaders because they do exist. You could ignore them, but they do exist. Okay. What the Gen Zs have done, we are really proud that they actually went forth and engaged the electoral as well as the governance matters of this nation. We are very proud of them. But the problem is when you do not have leadership, then you don't you don't end up having a mission and a vision, and you don't have a goal at the end of it all. For example, they went to the streets, they wanted the bill scrapped. It was scrapped. Then is that the end of it? But they have more. So we would like them to come on the table that we'll set. It will be a table for equals. It won't be that this person is more or better than the other. This one is the leader of this or the other. But we'll have at least a structured talk so that what we bring forth will bear fruits that will be beneficial, not just to them, but for the entire nation. And we really look forward to having them on that multi-sectoral table.
Okay. Otieno, coming to you, of course, as Father has mentioned, a lot of injustices were witnessed. And of course, you did mention earlier on that we saw police use force, if I may use that word, to disperse demonstrators. Of course, even right now, if you look at the social media, there is a trend going on right now that is being alleged that a boy has been killed and shot in Rongai. Perhaps what could you have done different when it comes to, dealing with protesters?
Thank you. There were several things that went wrong. The first, at the very face value, was we saw a very armed policemen who looked like snipers on top of Parliament and on top of KICC. And I think, like I've mentioned several times before, this is the first time we are seeing snipers or people who look like snipers being deployed to deal with peaceful protests. So there are indications that those people killed quite a number of people around Parliament, around KICC, around Harambee Avenue. It is not clear exactly yet how many people died. Then the other concerning thing is that at around Parliament and several other places, we saw gunmen, not necessarily in uniform, people who had guns. They were not wearing police uniform. We assume they were security officers. They were shooting directly into the crowd that was surging towards Parliament. Now, the people died. I saw the media say 8 people, but from preliminary investigations and some of the things that we saw, I think it would be very important for the authorities to exactly try to be transparent about what exactly happened at Parliament. That was around 3 p.m., around 2 p.m., and then what happened afterwards at around 5:30, how many people exactly died at Parliament. And then at night, we saw scenes from Githurai and along Thika Road, and we do understand that a number of people died in those areas. We don't know exactly who was shooting. The allegations that they were military, the allegations that there were police officers, some uniformed, others not uniformed, but several people died. Again, we would like to see some transparency and some honesty on the part of the government so that we get to understand exactly how many people died, what exactly happened at night in Githurai, what happened in Eldoret, and what happened in other parts of the country, how many people exactly died during these protests. And finally, we have had protests in this country. I think last year we had protests. 2022, we had some minor protests. We had protests 2020, we had protests in 2017. All those protests, we haven't exactly addressed the issue of accountability, especially where the police have officially been sanctioned and deployed and they commit this kind of atrocities. And we are seeing it now. We want an assurance from the state, or from the government specifically, that this time around there's going to be accountability, genuine investigations and proper accountability for those who are involved.
Well, speaking of accountability, we saw President William Ruto come out and address the nation, and he did assert that only 6 people had lost their lives. We equally saw, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights come out and say at least 23 people have lost their lives. From the Human Rights Watch, perhaps have you done your own tally? Do you have a number?
Well, we really want to to emphasize, like I've mentioned, that it is really difficult right now to know exactly how many people died. Whether we go with 6 or 10 or 23, I really think that is not an accurate figure. We do think that we need proper investigations about what happened at Parliament, what happened in Githurai, what happened along Thika Road, what happened in the informal settlements around Nairobi and other parts like Eldoret, Nakuru, Meru, so that we get to know the exact tally. I don't think it is 23. I think it's much higher than 23. Our preliminary figures, which I don't want to discuss right now, show that it is much, much higher than 53. And the problem with this is that sometimes we tend to reduce human life to statistics. And that's the problem. And that's why we say we probably need to move beyond that so that we begin to talk accountability, investigations, institutions such as IPOA proving their worth, beginning to do something that is meaningful, unlike the previous protests. I don't want to talk about the president's figure of 6 because I don't know where that figure came from, but this is something we have been used to. Because in 2017, when the protesters were killed, the government insisted only 6 people had been killed. But our investigations, which we eventually forwarded to IPOA, showed that it was over 100 people who had been killed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Father, coming to you, you see, transparency is one of the other issues that is making the situation worse. Because we have seen parents come out and say, why kill a child who's just starting their life? And then to make matters worse, we're getting a number of different figures. Looking at it from the point of view of a parent who is asking themselves, why did my child have to die because of fighting for something they believe in? It leaves more questions than answers, don't you think?
It does, and it doesn't just touch those parents who gave birth to these children, but also the rest of the country. And we as church leaders are really hurt that we lost such young lives, people who had quite a lot of years to cover and to really impact members of their families, members of this nation, the church, anybody who they would have touched in this life, their life would have been different. And for that, we really, really are saddened. That is why we are mourning with those parents. In fact, as NCCK member churches, we are mourning with those families for 7 days, from tomorrow, 28th of June, until the 7th of July. We'll be mourning with these families, not because of anything else, but because we want to show solidarity. We may not feel the pain that they are going through, but we really want to show that this is something that should not be repeated. We spoke to the president about it. We have pushed it in all our press conferences, and we will continue reiterating this message that this should not happen again. We have seen our neighboring countries, and what happened when chaos and anarchy was what prevailed in those lands. They lost lives that they can't go back to. They lost time, they lost property, they lost even their own nations. They can't go back there. And it doesn't start any other way. It starts the way we just started, with one body living this life, because somebody was not accountable, somebody didn't act right. We ask and we push the government to bring forth those soldiers, those askaris that were involved in all of this, whether they were uniformed or not, as well as for the leadership to take responsibility, because life was lost. And it is them who are in charge, it is them who are in position to stop this kind of atrocity. We do not want to go back to past regimes where people are dying every single day. We also push for the government to release unconditionally those who are already imprisoned, because some of them maybe may end up losing their lives or their livelihood because they are imprisoned. And that's not something we want. The reality is, it is the leaders of this nation that lost track of what they were supposed to be doing. That's why these Gen Zs and those who walked with them in the streets went to do this kind of protests. For that matter, the leadership should take responsibility and genuinely also bring forth the numbers. It is true, no government will agree to say this is the number of people that lost their lives.
Yeah.
And the human rights, of course, will bring their numbers. But the reality is even one lost life is something to mourn and to not repeat again.
So, Otieno, even as we continue mourning the lives that were lost, as a country, how do we move on? How does the leadership move on, considering that almost, let's say, half of Kenyans do not trust the government?
The beginning is for people or for the leadership to begin to be honest, not just with the people, but also with themselves. And when something like this happens, a protest like this takes place, I think it is important for the leadership to show concern and to appreciate publicly that something wrong has happened and commit to proper investigations and accountability. But if you look at even the way the entire police operation was set up, it was set up to hide the truth. Look at even the way the military was deployed. It was deployed without any mechanism for oversight. And what we have seen from the past is that whenever military is deployed, there's a lot of things that happen both during the day and in darkness that never get revealed. And where they are involved in killings, like we are told in Githurai, it was the military which may have been involved in the killings. It's difficult for families to even get justice. And it's important when such a thing happens for people to see that there was justice. Without that, it's difficult to move forward. Secondly, if you look at even the way the police handled scenes where there could have been killings, and after that where the bodies were taken and how they were handled, it shows there's lack of honesty, even transparency, or even willingness to be accountable to the people from our leadership and from the way the police, the security agencies behaved. Like the bodies that were picked from parliament buildings, where did the security people take them? Because from my understanding, they were picked from parliament by officers from Central Police Station and KICC. But they are not at City Mortuary, they are not at Kenyatta National Hospital, they are not at Mama Lucy Hospital, they are not at KU. Where did those bodies go? So these are issues that need to be addressed. And that's why we are saying we need transparency in terms of the people who died and what happened and where were the bodies taken.
You know, Father, from what Otieno has mentioned, honesty, transparency, and accountability. And these are just some of the issues that the Gen Z were equally fighting for. We want a government that's accountable. We want a government that thinks of the people, not themselves. Things that should be happening, not for us to go out and protest, for it to start happening. Why? Many questions have been asked about the church and the fact that the church keeps on giving a platform to politicians. So one question I was told to ask you today is, why did it take so long for the church to take a stand on this issue of the finance bill?
Actually, many people do not know that we already took a stand. Even before many people started protesting, we already took a stand because we read through this document, we went through, and there are many issues that we brought forth to the concerned parliamentary committee and say this is wrong. For example, the eco levy, the bread tax, the motor vehicle tax, the personal data being given to KRA if they want to collect tax from you, the recycling plant taxes, the internet and data taxes, all of these issues, we raised them and we said remove them completely from this bill. So we were already there. It's only that we were not a subject at that moment. Secondly, it is true that the church has always been there when social issues are discussed. And we consider ourselves as part of the civil society, if not the light of many institutions of this country. And we lead in all these issues. Why were we talking about the bill? Because we had gone through it, we saw what was wrong for this nation, and we called it and we told the leaders, but they didn't listen to us. They took some issues, they left some, and the reality is that's why the church has always been saying, and NCCK can be seen on television, on radio, on newspaper saying, we don't want this to go on. Take it back to the people so that the expenditure can be managed, the budget can be reviewed, and corruption can be managed in this country, because we feel a lot is wasted. A lot of the resources of this nation are wasted in corruption. So we were always speaking. It's only that maybe we were not as loud as we would have, yes, as we should have. And we apologize for that if we didn't speak to the right people at the right time to make sure that this didn't happen. Secondly, the platform that we give politicians is because they are our constituents. They are our members in the churches. Why would we say you are a politician and therefore do not come to church anymore? We can't say that. Secondly, yes, there are leaders who have been elected by people, so sometimes in church they get seats at the front before anybody else can get them. The reality is we have reviewed also this space that we have given them, especially speaking in churches, giving money in churches. We have, for example, in the just concluded executive of the National Council of Churches, we have told all our member churches that when politicians give money in church, they will give like everybody else gives in church. Everybody else gives quietly, they will do so as every other member. They will not be given special chances. They will not speak inside our churches. They will not speak when we are having the services. They may speak outside the church to the congregation. If they do, that's okay, but not within the church premise. Why? Because we have seen it being misused. We have seen it, we have listened to the Kenyans also as they pointed fingers at us, and we want that to change also. So we want to tell the Kenyans that
put in place to ensure that this happens.
All the leaders of the member churches of the National Council of Churches and the heads of churches have agreed to this, and we are hoping that when we start as National Council of Churches, all the other churches will also be guided in this way, and hopefully they will also do the same, so that we can show this country that we can listen and we can hear them.
You know, when you say all the members, not all churches are under the National Council of Churches of Kenya.
Yes.
So how do we ensure as a country that this is uniform across what?
Unfortunately, we have many forums, like the multi-sectoral forum that I just mentioned. We could discuss more about that, but we can't speak for other churches because they are not members of the National Council. But we hope that they can also listen. As we are telling the government, listen, we hope that they can also listen, because many Kenyans have pointed out that error, that you churches give the podium to politicians, you give them opportunity because they are giving you money. It's true that they give money, but they give money just like anybody else gives money. Or why give them that space to give that money in a peculiar or in a special way? We want to cancel out that from here henceforth, and we spoke this also to the president yesterday, and he agreed with us.
Okay. Otieno, coming to you, and of course hearing that Father has said that the church has put measures in place to ensure that, you limit some of the issues that we were seeing happening. When you look at issues of human rights violation, adhering to the rule of law and following what the Constitution states, for example, how the police and the role of police and how they treat demonstrators during their demonstrating, how would you do it differently, or how will you ensure that actually the rule of law is followed from your point of view?
Yeah, I think whenever police are being trained, they're taken through the policing standards. I think there are UN policing standards, especially when it comes to crowd control, which police know. If you talk to any police officer who has graduated, they know what those standards are. And basically, when it is a protest situation like what we saw, police ought to provide security to the protesters so that they are not infiltrated or attacked by other people whose intentions are unclear or are not in line with the intentions of the protesters. But also, if there are two groups of protesters like what we saw in Eldoret on Tuesday and I think on Monday also in Nairobi and on Tuesday in the morning in Nairobi, then the police work is to ensure that the two groups do not conflict, but also to guide the protesters properly, but largely not to interfere with the protests, allow protesters to protest freely without interference, and where possible, to not use live ammunition on protesters unless necessary, especially where they need to protect life. I think what I've seen in Kenya is that we are trying to vary the standards. We are trying to say that property is now more important than the life, so we shoot to kill to protect property. I don't think that was the intention of those standards. And police know. If you talk to the police, they know. I think the problem usually comes when the politicians begin to interfere, when politics begin to contaminate the work of the police. And when politics begin to do that, we also begin to have problems with accountability. For example, I'll give you a few examples. In 2017 in Kisumu, there were a number of killings that happened, and a few people were supposed to have been taken to court, but they were never taken to court. But the question is, what happened? Usually when police get deployed to a situation like this, they have a commander on the ground who then issues commands which they all follow. They can't do anything without the commander on the ground issuing commands. But in Kisumu, some few people in Nairobi decided to deploy GSU secretly without the knowledge of the commander on the ground. So the GSUs on the ground were receiving commands from Nairobi and shooting people. A lot of the shootings around Kondele in Kisumu were happening were being undertaken by the GSUs who were deployed from Nairobi. And I do think that what happened in Nairobi on Tuesday, what we saw, was a question of multiple commands, confusion in the command structure. So there were units there that were not reporting to the commander on the ground. And we need to avoid that. We need to remove politics from policing work and allow police to do their work. And then when there's a problem, then we simply know, because there's no way police are deployed without the operational order. The operational order is what tells you these are the number of police officers who are deployed in this and these places. Then there's a register of movement of arms and ammunition, which tells you this officer had this gun, had this ammunition, where are they? Then you begin to address the issue of accountability. But when politics interfere, it's difficult to tell what happened. Thank you.
When politics interfere, it's difficult to tell what happens. But, there's something good that has come out of all this. Thanks to the young generation, Kenyans are more aware. They are more awake. They are more interested in the national issues. So with all that said and done, do you think Kenya has come of age, finally?
We have grown a notch than we were because, for example, demonstrating that last week, the demonstrations that were there, they were there and peaceful.
It was good to see.
Nobody was hurt. And the message was home. Everybody was really, really happy. We are saddened by what changed this week. I know some people took advantage also of that situation, but that is quite a step. Now we know we can demonstrate and push issues without anybody getting harmed. Two, that it doesn't matter what age you are. You don't need to be led by any political movement. any political leader. People can just come out from their village or from their town or city or even slum and bring their agenda to the leaders, and people listen. We hope this is something that will reawaken each and every one of us, and to show that we are a mature country, we are a mature democracy, that our laws can work. We are really, and it's quite unfortunate that this week changed some of that, but last week was on top of everybody's list, that truly, if our young people can march, what about the other generations? If our young people can say this is wrong, and our leaders are hearing that, who else cannot? So for sure, this is a game changer for this nation from here henceforth.
Yeah, but further, just to maybe throw a spanner in the works, you know, looking at how the members of parliament did behave during all this finance bill protest and during the public participation, for the young generation, even when you're thinking about, you know, giving them a table and a seat, how sure are we as a nation that they will actually be listened to? Because we've seen it. We've seen them being ridiculed. We've seen them being dismissed. How do we move on and ensure that their voice is actually heard this time round? They don't have to go back to the streets.
The problem is we are in Africa, and in Africa, age seems to be a defining factor when you speak to senior persons or senior elders. And the reality is, when people are speaking, even children can speak to their grandparents, and they will listen. And when they do listen, they become even wiser. What happened to our members of parliament is a warning shot, if I may tell them now, that they must listen, even to young kids in the streets, because children have changed the perceptions and thinking and worldviews of many, many great leaders in the past. Today, it's the Gen Zs. They are very lucky. It's people who are educated, people who have gone to the university, people who are in college, who are speaking to them, people who can think straight, and really, they brought points that everybody could hear, and for sure, there were points that could be understood. The reality is, they didn't listen. I hope from here henceforth, our members of parliament will listen. As a church, we will hold the hands of the Gen Zs, as we said in our press conferences this week, in the multi-sectoral forums. We'll give them the space. We'll make sure their agenda is heard, their agenda is listed. Nobody will speak for them. They will speak for themselves, nothing for them without them, and we'll make sure they are heard to the highest peak of this nation. For sure, we'll deliver that if they give us the opportunity to do so.
Otieno, coming to you, the clarion call seems to be listen, listen, listen. The same question to you also. Do you think Kenya has come of age, and how should we move forward, even as you give your final thoughts?
I don't know, when we say come of age, we mean come of age in which respect. I think in terms of human rights, I think we should have come of age long time ago. But I think there are some retrogressive acts that we commit that basically undermine our ability to mature as a human rights respecting society. One, for example, is just the what I've stated, the lack of transparency in everything that we want to do. We want to undermine institutions. We want to obscure the truth. So we want to deploy the police, but we don't want to follow the law. We want to deploy the military, but we don't want to follow the law. But we want other people to follow the law when it is convenient to us. So we call on the protesters to follow the law when you're going to protest. But you deploy the military without even wanting to follow procedure. The court issues orders stopping that, but you deploy anyway. I think that is wrong. If we create laws to govern us, we need to follow those laws. If we don't follow, we are creating room for anarchy. So in terms of maturity, you can't mature if you don't follow the law. If you're talking of investors, for example, investors want to go into an environment that is predictable. And what creates that predictability is the law. If you don't want to follow the law, it means anybody can do what he wants. And if they go to court, the court will issue orders, but the orders will be meaningless because they're not being followed. It becomes a problem. But the leadership cannot expect that the people will follow the law if you yourself don't follow the law. The maturity comes that way. The maturity comes with first beginning to respect the law that we set to govern us. Thank you.
I would say to the country, may we have peace, may we have soberness. Now that this bill has gone back behind us, may nobody else lose any lives. Those who are in prison, may they be let go. The Gen Zs, we are giving you an opportunity to come as stakeholders, equal stakeholders. With the church, walk with us, bring your points on the table. We'll make sure they are heard by the president, by the leaders of this nation. It is you who will speak. It is you who will lead your agenda. We'll make sure that that happens. And to you who are our leaders, please make sure there is accountability to those lives that have been lost, to those people who have been harmed, those people whose property was destroyed, their shops rooted. May you speak to them and work with them. And may God bless this nation. God give us guidance as we walk through growing into a better democracy than we have. And thank you very much.
And we will also keep the church on their feet and ensure that they will do everything that they have said they will do. That is our job as well.
We will. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Very Reverend Father Evangelist Thierry, of course, here representing the National Council of Churches of Kenya. And we equally had Otieno Namwaya, who is a researcher at the Human Rights Watch, joining us via Zoom. Well, that's how we wrap things up. But before we conclude finally, I just want to inform you on what to expect in tomorrow's, that is the Standard, the Kenya's bold newspaper, and the headline is the military question. Of course, anti-tax demos, the military will remain in the streets to help police quell protests. A court ruled today as thousands of demonstrators came out in major towns, albeit in small numbers than on Tuesday, of course, to protest against the Ruto administration. Not only that, you'll equally be informed on America's call for restraint amid finance bill protest, and equally what America is saying about dialogue. It is backing the dialogue. Equally, we'll be telling you about the deputy president and the book, the playbook that he's borrowed from President William Ruto. And equally on sports, there will be all eyes on the prize at Euro Fiesta, and equally Pulse will be featured in tomorrow's Standard. So be sure to grab a copy. I'm Ashley Mazuri. Have a good night.